It's another day in America. Another day in America. Welcome to the America at 250 podcast, devoted to enabling us to see and feel America through the eyes and hearts of others, and as a result, take concrete steps to make America truly great. I'm Kevin Caldwell. And in order to pursue the purpose of this podcast, throughout the project, I'll be inviting a very diverse set of guests to share how they would answer what would make America great. It only seems fitting during this year in which America turns 250. Unanswered questions, 250 years and counting, we're still waiting in America. Well, welcome everybody to this episode of the America at 250 podcast, in which I'm really trying to explore ways that we can invite each other into empathy and compassionate experiences of what it's like to be in America during this point in our history. And hopefully, as if you've been following along, you would have picked up that there are ways that I'm inviting us to consider active responses to all of that as we go. My guest in this interview is a fellow singer-songwriter, Joseph Tseng, also based in Los Angeles. Really excited to explore what we're going to be talking about today. But Joseph, just say a few things about yourself, and then we'll be off and running.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Thanks for having me. I don't know if you use this word for yourself, but I feel like we are kindred spirits, as I would say, artivists, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
primarily, I'm
say that word again, artivist, right?
artivists.
Yes.
Yes, this kind of weaving in and out of art and activism, and
Mm-hmm.
always having one or the other on our minds, right? And trying to meld them. I'm primarily a singer-songwriter, but I do, events that weave storytelling, community. What I think about is community weaving, not so much building.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the better metaphor for what I do. And I
Mm.
come from a long background of K-12 education, and so there's a part of me that thinks a lot about multi-generational education that also gets incorporated. But primarily, I'm a singer-songwriter.
Yeah.
Um, I can tell you a little bit about my artist name.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, my government name is Joseph Chang, Chang.
Ah.
But I go by Joseph Tseng, Tseng, in honor of my great uncle Andrew. So a little bit about him. He, was a Chinese and then later immigrated to the U.S. in his, I think, 60s or 70s.
Late
Yeah,
in life.
yeah. So later Chinese American.
Or I should say early middle age, since I'm
Yeah,
young.
early. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, he was he lived for quite some time.
Okay.
It was great. But he was a painter, poet. He was an
Hmm.
acupuncturist and herbalist, so I think of that as like a healer of a different kind.
Hmm.
He never had children, but treated me like a grandson. And he's also just the only um, he was the only kind of artist in the family that I could identify. I think there might have been other artists, but just the context in which my parents grew up through revolution and then immigration, it's like there's really
Mm.
not a lot of room for artists to kind of work.
Oh,
But I think my great uncle Andrew was of a generation that he was already doing these things, and so I have his paintings up in our house and everything, and so he means a lot to me.
yeah,
But he never had children, and this is a little, this is very a patriarchal kind of part of Chinese culture that
sure.
is nowadays, I question. At the same time, it's really it was really meaningful for him to be able to have his uh, last name, handed down across generations. And since he didn't have children, my parents had actually promised that their second child would carry his last name.
Mm.
My parents never had a second child. So I felt like, well, in this kind of second act of my life, as like my artist self, I would be his descendant, as
Mm.
the other artist in the family, So I go
Beautiful.
by Joseph Tsang. Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Well, and you mentioned community weaving. We're going to come back to that in a bit when we begin to talk about a recent event that where an album release party, and the album is going to be talking about that album is going to be primarily the focus of our conversation. But I'm going to ask you the kind of question that I have asked every one of my interview partners. We are in the midst of actually now a few weeks on from the celebration of America's 250th anniversary. At the day we're recording this is almost the end of July 2026, and of course they're leading up to that big day and subsequent to it, all these different celebrations and also a lot of rhetoric from various segments of our society about celebrating America as it turns 250 and celebrating those 250 years of history and going back to the first July 4th, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We all know, what I'm referencing. But one of the questions I ask everybody who comes on the podcast is, okay, but for someone who isn't as we said in our prior conversation before we hit record, if you call up central casting for a movie or a TV show and say, send me an American, they're just for everybody who does not fit the bill of who central casting would call. I've been asking, what's it like to be in America with all that going on as we turn 250? So for you, a descendant of Chinese immigrants, what's it like being in America with all that going on? Just kind of at an emotional, visceral level, Joseph. And we'll dig into more details of this as we go, but yeah, just an initial response to that.
Oh, there's a lot I could say, but I guess um the emotion I think maybe I would describe as troubling. Yeah,
Troubling.
yeah, it's and also um maybe what I would say, it's troubling because I think there's a certain perspective. I mean, just as an example, I remember as a child, I've been in the U.S. since I was 1 years old, and
Okay.
I think I was maybe 7 or something like that, and some family friends were visiting from China and having conversation in our apartment or whatever with my dad, and I was listening in on it, and I remember this my dad's friend from China saying, America, um, they're like teenagers. Like it's a really young country. They,
Mm,
just they
mm,
they
mm,
sort of just think they're invincible, and it's very short-sighted, and just the
mm,
way that teenagers are. Um,
mm.
and he's like,
Fascinating.
it's like China's been around for thousands of years, and so it's just a different perspective. And he wasn't even necessarily saying it in a condescending way. It was just
It's
like,
just an observation,
yeah,
right? This
but
is
it's
just
also,
the way it
yeah.
is.
I
Mm-hmm.
mean, there was a little bit of that, like, oh, how cute. Like it's right, And so when I think about like 250, and
Yeah.
on one hand, I think it's a little bit like it's interesting. It's like that's not a lot of time, um,
Right. Right.
to be making such a big deal out of it. But also, to me, it feels almost more like an opportunity um, to forward a certain mythology about our history and about,
Yeah.
or at least an incomplete history around
Yeah.
how about what this country is about or what it should be about. And so for me, it's troubling because on one hand, um, yeah, I just think the
Yeah.
perspective of this sort of America is everything, and so
Mm-hmm.
we're 250 years old, and so like the world should stop now, and you know, um,
Yeah.
and then also then what gets filled in that gap are things that I think are actually not good for, let's say, America 500. And so
Right.
uh,
Right. Yeah.
yeah, so it's
Which actually, for those who kind of study cycles of history, the 400 or 500 year period is often when civilizations collapse. So
Mhm.
you would expect that even at the height of their glory and fame, which is what some people think we're at right now, um, the seeds of the eventual collapse are usually evident in retrospect, and it does make me wonder what seeds are sprouting. I have thoughts about that, but that's not the point
Yeah,
of our
right.
conversation right now. But I think that's a very unique perspective. I think I really appreciate that, and I think it makes sense coming from the actually the Chinese background, ancient civilization with, I mean, centuries of actual, very advanced civilization. Um, then observing this kind of young upstart American adolescent. I think that's a really fascinating observation.
And you know, it gives
Uh,
me like a certain kind of perspective on
yeah.
the anti-immigration, uh,
Mm, mm, mm,
whatever movement, rhetoric, or whatever's
mm.
happening right now. Not that it's new, but you know, it's definitely a heated
Sure.
debate
It
now.
sprouts up and becomes
Yeah,
intense at different seasons of our history. Yeah.
yeah, because I think about you know, like let's say white Americans who have been here for 3 generations or something like that, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, then you know, for those that then feel like very grounded in I'm American, and
Right.
you having immigrated in the 70s are not. And you know, um I'm like 250 is like a rounding error, you know, so
Yeah.
what's the so let's actually look at the history then,
Right. Right.
right? Like where did you come from, right? Like a central part of this record is like this question of you know, I've been asked, like many Asian Americans and other folks of color, like, you know, where are you really from, right?
Yeah.
And my wife, who is white South African, she immigrated 8 years after me. She doesn't get asked that question, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, it's kind of clarifying, like
Yep.
this immigration question. I do think there, you know, it's nuanced. I do think there's some people where it's really about immigration,
Right.
but I think for a lot of people, they don't mind. I mean, you know,
Mm.
we saw with Trump and the white South Africans, right?
Exactly. I was
Like,
just
like,
going to reference
yeah,
that. Yeah.
we don't actually.
Yeah.
It's not actually
It's
about immigration. It's about
it,
a certain xenophobia or
yeah, that's right. Xenophobia, racism,
yeah,
whatever we term we want to use. And I think that's I think nobody wants to be labeled a racist, even
yeah,
one who really is. I mean, there's a few who are just
sure.
like, yeah, I
They're fine
am.
with it. Yeah, yeah,
But yeah, but who own it, but and actually I respect them a little more than the ones who deny it but are it, right? Because at least you're being honest, right? So I respect the honesty, not the attitude or the position. But anyway, you mentioned the record, and so I want to get to that because for my listeners' benefit, um, uh, Joseph's put out a really really fascinating project that we're going to be. I hesitate even to call it a record because I think that puts something in somebody's minds. It's a very unique project called Shanghai, an American Story, which right there kind of, I think, in many ways, your title selection summarizes really kind of much of the essence of that whole project. So just say a little bit more about the title decision first, and then we're going to dig into a number of the tracks and see what's going on with that.
yeah. You know, the first thing I want to give credit to someone who has been like a coach of mine for quite some time, and Allison Rowland. She's actually the one that um I think off the cuff was like, you know, I think it could be because originally it was just Shanghai, you know.
Mm,
And as
mm,
we were
mm.
talking about the different themes and really what it was about, she kind of suggested, she's like, what it feels like this is like a it's like an American story, or you know, she said something like that, and I was
Yeah,
like, oh, that's exactly it. That's exactly
yeah,
the sentiment, you know. So just giving credit to Allison. Um,
yeah.
the I think, and this is Kevin, in no way a gotcha question,
No, no.
but I was thinking about how to um, why this title
Mm,
stands out to people.
right.
Like, I had somebody recently think like, oh, it's like actually on another podcast, you know, I think his response was, um, yeah, it's almost like it feels like an oxymoron.
Mm,
And I was like, oh, that's a lot to unpack there, you know? And
right,
so
right.
but part of me, I'm just wondering, even just for you, and again,
Sure. Yeah.
not a
Yeah.
gotcha
You
question, like
can
what
you
what
can
is
come
it?
back at yeah, you can
Yeah,
throw it back at me. That's not a gotcha question.
yeah, but it's also, I mean, to give you just so you know, like the person I'm referencing
Yeah.
is a fellow Chinese American, right? And
Interesting.
for him, it's like,
Interesting.
oh,
Yeah.
it felt like an oxymoron. And so it was like, let's unpack that. Why?
Mhm.
But I'm curious for you, um, like what stands out about it? Because
Sure.
you're not alone. Like what?
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. And actually that oxymoron thing, even not knowing who it came from. I mean, so just for my listeners who maybe aren't as familiar with that term, it's just like two words put together that don't belong together,
Mm,
basically,
mhm,
right?
mhm, mhm.
Has nothing to do with being a moron,
Yeah, yes, yes, yes,
but
yes.
or being on oxy,
Yeah.
but which is moronic. But anyway, that's a whole other topic. However, yeah. So I think for me, as I have pressed into it, I think there's a couple of layers to that title for me.
Mm,
One is that there are ways that the the storylines of the album, if you will, are set in both places because I know that there's a visit to Shanghai in it, and this is told by someone who's Chinese American, and that whole experience. And there's the American side of the story as well. But it's also it seems like it's a there's a psychological internal narrative going on as well, um, and the kind of Shanghai America inside of this person, meeting and interacting and struggling and trying to figure each other out. There's a very like internal piece as well as the just the narrative. But I think I also believe that there's a bigger cultural conversation going on that the individual kind of represents this sort of cultural engagement and so Shanghai as China specifically, American story as the whole immigrant experience and all that that means, which I think you explore in really powerful ways, in the music and the lyrics and the poetry, spoken word portions of this. So that's kind of my read of it all.
yeah.
Yeah, how'd I do, Coach?
No, no, no. This is not.
Yeah,
Genuinely, we might have different lived experiences, but I am learning alongside you.
yeah,
And so it's not. That's not how it.
yeah. No, I'm
That is not the
joking. Yeah, yeah,
positionality
yeah,
from which I would take this conversation.
yeah.
Um, uh, but yeah, I think in a way, I think you nailed it. But I think in different words, I
Well, I'm
would.
sure there's much more to it, but yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I was going to get into some of the specifics for me, but I think
yeah,
um, maybe on a more I don't know if intellectual is the right word, but I might say, in a way, it's kind of interrogating this idea of what is an American story,
yeah, yeah,
um, and kind of
beautiful,
getting at what is just American.
right.
Um, so at some of my events, we've done some things like we've looked at different kinds of. I did an event where it's just a bunch of American foods,
Yeah,
including things like
quote unquote.
yeah, including
Yeah,
things like burritos
right.
and and tortilla chips, which are invented in California by
Yeah.
Mexican Americans, um, and orange chicken or General Tso's chicken or all these
Hmm.
foods, and understanding like actually the hamburger and the hot dog are German American foods.
Hmm.
But what happens in just Americans, we actually erase the white ethnicity and we call it white and we just call it just American, right? And so oftentimes with Asian American kind of racialization, we talk a lot about invisibility and being made invisible. But
Yeah.
I actually think there's something about white invisibility that
Mm,
is
interesting.
that is not only harmful to everybody else, but is actually um, harmful to white folks. Like I actually think, just a short story that's not actually about me, but about my wife. Like my wife is white South African with ancestral roots in Northern Europe, like Denmark area. And I mean, there's Britain and a little French. And last year we got to go to France for the first time. I'd never been to France, and we were in Lyon, right? And there's this. We were at this like traditional Lyonnaise meal where we're eating foods that actually are somewhat kind of familiar to her, but in like sort of ways that she didn't totally understand. It's like we've never had this specific dish, but this like
Right.
herring dish reminded her of something that she grew up eating.
Something. Yeah.
Right. And it was this highly communal, um, people were like sharing things. It's like and she started tearing up
Mm,
because this was an example of a culture that we would consider like white, right? But really just like European, essentially,
yeah.
Eurocentric. That was not about a hyper individualism. That was not about domination. That was highly communal and collective and about these values that she wants to live by,
Mm.
but has no cultural anchoring to in America,
Yeah.
right? Or in South Africa in many ways.
Yeah.
But if you, but there are these pockets, and even if it's, I don't know how, and it's confusing because it's maybe it's like, and I feel this way about Shanghai sometimes. It's like, there's a lyric that's like, is it real or imagined?
Yeah.
Uh, but sometimes it's almost like, I don't know it's okay if some of it is fiction because we need to, there's an importance, I think, for being a human being of being able to root in a culture that is not about white American culture, right?
Right.
Because the history of white American culture is one of these things that I think are going to, uh, it's one of dominance of,
Hmm.
uh, dominance by racism, by all these things, right?
Yeah.
Homophobia, sexism,
Yeah.
uh,
Masculinity,
yeah,
whatever
all this
that is.
stuff
Yeah.
that is
Hmm.
actually harmful, even for the people that are
That are,
so-called,
yeah, that are
yeah,
in it, or
yeah, they're
or
in
have
it,
it.
yeah,
Yeah.
right?
Whatever, quote
So-called,
unquote, have
yeah.
it. Yeah.
And so anyway, that's a
Yeah.
long-winded way of saying like just interrogating this idea of what is
Yeah.
American,
Yeah.
and the invisibility of kind of whiteness when we talk about
Hmm.
America.
Hmm.
And then personally, I think there's some meanings to it where um, this idea of, me being asked the question, like, where are you really from? I
Hmm.
I actually would love white Americans to dig into that question,
Right.
right? So they might be able to have some
Ourselves, right? Yeah.
and have a different anchoring to some. Again, no civilization is perfect. There's tons of
Yeah.
terrible things in China's history, the atrocities, and so I'm
Yeah.
not saying it's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
but there's some sort of anchoring, and there are yeah, that just it just feels necessary. um
Yeah.
the uh but the other way of thinking about it too is Shanghai, the city itself. It's not technically so, but I think of it very much as um a Western colony, right?
Mm.
Like culturally, it is. People think of it as like the modern, but really, um, modern just means it's Western,
Yeah.
right? As
E-
opposed to Beijing and
Exactly. That's
uh,
right.
yeah,
Yeah.
and for better and for worse, like it's actually quite complicated. And I get into that with some of my songs, right? Because
Hmm.
Shanghai, on one hand, um, when I go around, sometimes I really mourn for the almost irony of people being really proud to be kind of European adjacent, right? It's like
Yeah.
you
That
have,
dynamic is there. Hmm.
right, that this kind of internalized,
Hmm.
I call it internalized Western superiority, um,
Hmm.
and but at the same time, that sort of assimilation into Western standards, let's say,
Yeah.
it's also the reason why someone like me who grew up in America, where it's also like dominated by these sort of standards, it's also why I'm somewhat comfortable there, you know.
Right.
And so it's kind of
Sure.
this very complicated thing for me.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Oh.
yeah, I guess the last thing I'll say is just pressing on this idea that in the same way that Germany is a part of the American story
Hmm.
because of, let's say, just when you like AI, show me a Fourth of July food spread or something, right? You're going to just see hamburgers, hot dogs, and all
Right.
these kinds of things that have some roots in Germany.
Yeah.
Um, but Shanghai, because it's a part of my story and because
Hmm.
I am an American, and if I, again, me being here for one generation versus someone here for three generations, it's a rounding error to me.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so,
Hmm.
um, so if I'm part of the American story fully, then Shanghai is part of the American story too.
Right.
So that's a lot, but that's kind of
Yeah. So, I mean, I
what
think a
I'm getting at.
couple things just to kind of make as explicit as I can for our listeners before I
Yeah.
start pressing into a couple of
Yeah.
specific tracks. I think one of the things I want to highlight that's coming out of this is the encouragement that, we all have histories. We tend to, we white Americans tend to think of ourselves just as American, as opposed to having histories and all that. Granted, we've had so many, European intermarriage things in our lives, it's harder for us to trace some of those things. But I think understanding that, I think the encouragement to be rooted in some awareness of that, the good, the bad, and the ugly. You mentioned, for example, China definitely has some dark spots in its history and all of that. Every people does. um, every culture, every socio-political entity that has existed for any length of time does. But there is a grounding there, and I think when we in America tend to look at immigration or multiculturalism or that kind of thing, we tend to view it as they're the others and we're the us,
Mhm.
we who are white, as opposed to, well, actually, we're kind of all others and we're all us. And so, what if we could just, and we've come here and others came here, and all those kind of things. So I think just making, as we're trying to kind of think empathetically and compassionately, just to highlight that for my listeners, and I find this interweaving at both a personal and probably intercultural level that we're kind of surfacing here, woven throughout the work of Shanghai, an American Story. And I actually want to start with some lines that come out of the next to last track. It's a track called Enough. Um, and one of the lines that really caught my attention was, "I'll never be enough for you. You'll never be enough for me. You might never be in love with me, and I might never be in love with you. In between, we can better be ourselves if we unpack this history." I'll just let you say a little bit more about that line if you want. But for me, it's kind of getting at all these layers. I can put myself in it interpersonally inside myself. I can, but I can also see it as this kind of bigger meta level of intercultural stuff. But anyway, say more.
Yeah. You and I are both poets, so I think the beauty of getting to talk to another poet about lyrics, the
Yeah.
I mean, one just quick note about what we were just talking about. I would say part of why I encourage all Americans really to dig into ancestral roots that are further back than 250 years is um, is because so much of Kevin, I think the work that you're doing and the work that actually would make us better as a people and as a country is empathy, right?
Hmm.
And just one example, I think the politics of the majority of Native Irish people and the
Mm.
politics of the majority of Irish Americans are really different when you think about global politics.
Interesting.
And
Yeah.
I think the reason is because the Native Irish folks understand their own history, right? That is
Hmm.
not that from the British Empire and it's not that far back.
Right.
But
I mean,
Irish
it's in
Americans,
their face. Yeah.
yeah, but Irish Americans have a history in America of being assimilated, right? They were discriminated
Right.
against, then were assimilated into American whiteness. And so they were incentivized to forget their history,
Yeah.
be erased, to be ethnically erased into American whiteness. And so then by
Hmm.
the time they got grandkids,
Yep.
their grandkids don't have any empathy
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, I shouldn't say any, but empathy is
Yeah.
hard
Yeah.
to reach if
No.
it's not back in
Hmm.
your own history, right?
Yeah.
And so that's an example. It's not,
Yeah.
anyway. So, but let me answer your your question about enough.
Yeah. Thanks.
Um, this song, it's wonderful to hear how you kind of heard it, I think. Uh,
Mm.
but I'll tell you how the phases for me of writing this.
Sure.
Initially, this was a song about um, my relationship with the city of Shanghai.
Okay.
This
Hmm.
idea that I was born there, I have roots there, my
Right.
parents grew up there, um, and the album sort of waffles between these experiences of an incredible sort of fit and comfort and belonging
Yeah.
that I find when I'm there, that is kind of real and fictional, um, and also this like an opposite version of unbelonging. So in the way that
Yeah.
in America, it's the closest thing to home that I know is, America and California, probably specifically. Um, but there's also, because of all sorts of things in America, there's a constant sense of unbelonging, right? And it's like when I go to Shanghai, it's like I have the exact opposite experience, like the
Okay.
exact opposite flip. The parts that feel like they are not welcome in America are welcome in Shanghai. And
Sure.
the other
Right.
parts make me a foreigner, right? Like I have this
Right.
really like an example is like I speak a child's version of Shanghainese, right, which is like in the native dialect. Um, when I grew up, there were not a lot of Shanghainese speaking Chinese Americans around me. So
Right.
even in Chinese American community, it's like it was just like a
Yeah.
blood relationship family language. Um, when I go to Shanghai and I hear this dialect everywhere, I have this feeling of like I must be related to all these people, right? Because
Mm.
it's I only hear this.
Yeah.
But then what happens?
Echoes of your childhood. Yeah.
Yeah, but then here's like kind of the without using curse words here, but the thing that messes with your mind, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is so I'm feeling this great familial emotion when I hear the language. But then I remember like this last trip I was at an intersection, and these folks were speaking Shanghainese because they can smell my Americanness like a block away, right?
Yeah.
And
Uh,
and they were saying in Shanghainese, where do you think he's from? And then they say
mhm.
in the dialect they say, "Oh, he's Ngakwening," and what that means is he's a foreigner. Probably
Interesting.
grew up somewhere, and he's right. And so I'm a foreigner in Shanghai.
Yeah.
I'm a there's the perpetual foreigner thing in America with
Right.
Asian, right?
Simply
And so
because you look different
yeah,
without hearing you or whatever, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
and also culturally, right? Like it's like
Right.
we all bring our
Yes, of
culture with
course. But yeah.
yeah. But
Yeah.
so it's just that so I think this guy idea of enough was like I initially wrote it because like, oh well, I there's a way I really want to have a belonging in Shanghai, but I'm never going to be enough because even even in my
Yeah.
mother tongue, folks are calling me a foreigner, right?
Right.
At the same time, then I realized, oh, but I could easily flip this song and it's actually about my American experience,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
Um,
That's
then
that reciprocity of
yeah,
this dynamic, I think, is
that's
really
right.
key.
And then when I actually started to perform this song, I realized like, oh, actually, I think this is how I feel about my parents, right?
Yeah.
Which is a whole nother dynamic because in many ways, growing up, my parents in the house almost like was the representation of Shanghai.
Hmm.
And outside the house was, we're American, right? And so so this song has a lot of kind of layered meaning for me. And I think you took it to more like just the macro histories and which I think is in the same way relevant.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I think it's all of it. I think there's layers in it, right? Like I think it's well, you're the writer, so I agree with you
yeah,
that it starts at that kind of very like
yeah,
micro to the micro level, like
yeah,
your experience. But I think what really stood out to me, and obviously we all come at a work of art or a song from a current context and setting, right? It will land. This song could land differently for me in a year. Right now, I'm doing this America at 250 podcast, and I'm getting ready to talk to you, et cetera. And I'm listening again to that song and looking at those lyrics, and I see this line, we can better be ourselves if we unpack this history. And I'm
mm,
thinking that could summarize the whole purpose of the podcast. If we could actually understand this multicultural, multi-immigrant, you know, beauty and beast history of ourselves, me
yeah,
as an individual, as well as our country and our multiple cultures and streams, we could actually better be ourselves if we could actually unpack that history and actually I'd be more myself
yes,
by engaging it. um, America can be more itself by engaging it. So it's all, there's layers, as one of my favorite lines from the donkey in Shrek, we've all got layers, Shrek. Yeah.
onions, yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
Parfait.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm jokingly because I like to as earlier with Allison, it's important to me to give credit when I learn
Yeah.
things from, people, but I'm like, I'm gonna steal that, Kevin, you know.
Go for it, man. Yeah. Yeah.
I will say when I had a conversation with, Kevin.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I definitely want credit, and if you earn anything from streams, I want part of that 0.000000. Yeah.
Right.
Anyway, hey, I'm gonna jump to another
Yeah.
part of this, and I have a bunch of lines that I pulled out and tracks that I could talk about, but I actually want to jump to the one of my favorite tracks, and it's kind of in many ways the centerpiece. And I'm going to include it as the outro of this episode, everybody. So stay tuned. But the foreign on the fourth,
Mm,
and which I just think is a really beautiful um, connection actually to this whole podcast, America 250. But I had never been more American when I was foreign on the 4th of July.
Yeah.
Just unpack that, and you may need to talk about more of the song, but that line in particular really jumped out at me.
Yeah, I mean the next line after that line is uh in Shanghai, right?
Yes.
And so it's this
Yep.
and maybe this story is the best way to encapsulate it. Like this line was inspired, I mean, certainly by personal feelings around being in Shanghai, but inspired by a friend of mine who used to spend Chinese American, used to spend summers in Shanghai. His wife actually was Shanghainese, and or has some connection there, and uh, he would, you know, he I remember he had a oh, sorry, let me back up
All
here.
right.
He would tell me, so he's a like ethnic studies professor, community lawyer, like did a lot of advocacy for East Coast Chinatowns, so um, and he would tell me, in the US, he tended to lay low on July 4th because he sort of, in his words, I needed to kind of avoid the patriotic racism that tends to sometimes like the fourth in a way that
Yeah.
I think we're
Yeah.
talking about with the
Well, and I think
250,
in
right? Yeah.
particular this year, that's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
been, yeah.
Yeah. Right. It's the sort of explosion of the certain kind of narrative around what is American that does
Yeah,
not.
I mean it's happening in the context, just to remind my hearers of, erasing people of color from government websites, erasing women and the contributions of women in leadership, and the Save Act and the redistricting issues, and it's just this blatant, as well as all the anti-immigration stuff, which obviously applies in this conversation, and America's current relationship with China, how we understand China, all that stuff, which is very full of recency bias and all kinds of stuff. Anyway, I cut in on you there,
No,
but
no, no. Yeah.
this
You're providing context.
context, there is a very racial, I wouldn't even call it an undertone in the
An overtone.
operation of the 4th of July. It is blatant, and it's white male as well. And so, yeah.
I mean, it's literally going back to 1776 when the Declaration of Independence did not include women, did not
Hmm.
include folks of color, right? I mean,
Right.
it's literally going back there. So,
Yeah.
um, the uh, so anyway, he used to spend these summers in Shanghai, and he talked about how in Shanghai he found himself hosting these Fourth of July like cookouts,
Yeah.
right? And he would like because Shanghai's a pretty international city, and so he talked about like yeah he befriended this a Black American who was like working and living in Shanghai, um, and one day he saw this his neighbor, his Black American neighbor, in the elevator with these two large bags full of watermelons, right?
Mm,
And they look at each other and they start like laughing,
mm.
and his neighbor is like, oh, I would never be caught dead like this back home. But here this kind of trope of black men and watermelons doesn't exist. I happen to really like watermelon. It's super hot here. My
Yeah.
native
Yeah.
Chinese
Yeah. Yeah.
neighbor was educating me about cooling foods and warming foods and Chinese medicine and watermelon
Learning the
cooling food.
culture. Yep.
And so
Hmm.
he's like, I'm just kind of going for it. Um,
Hmm.
and I thought, what an amazing American story that
Yeah.
could only happen in Shanghai, right?
That's
Um,
powerful.
and
Yeah. That's
and
beautiful. Hmm.
and then my friend, is kind of a mentor for me. He also, he's an educator, and so he's like, well, this is an example of Toni Morrison's term, the white gaze, right, which is also in the song.
Yeah.
The idea of
Yeah.
like folks of color live often in America as if like there's some sort of like panel of like white folks judging everything that
Yep.
we're
These
doing, right?
invisible eye, the
Yeah,
eye
yeah,
in the
right.
sky. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And in
Yeah.
Shanghai, somewhat
That
goes
isn't there.
away, right?
Yeah.
Isn't there? And so
Really
there's a way in which
interesting.
I'm the most free I ever felt as an American, not in America, right?
Right.
And so it's kind of getting at this sentiment of never
Yeah.
been more American, right? America's all about freedom. We talk about all this stuff, but for some of us,
But it really isn't, is
um,
it?
Yeah, well, it's just like that kind of freedom. I mean, even the why, you Kevin, you've heard a lot of my songs. Most of them I would describe as kind of they definitely have an edge of grief. There's a
Hmm.
lot of, that kind of emotion in it. And this is like this kind of happy, upbeat song. And I remember when I was writing,
Mm,
I'm like, oh, because I'm trying to capture this emotion of me just walking down the street in Shanghai and feeling really light and almost whimsical and wondering, why do I feel this way?
yeah,
Because doesn't feel like me. And then realizing, oh, like, what is this lightness? And I think what it was is like, oh, it's because I'm not under the weight of this kind of white American gaze.
yeah,
And here there's like
yeah.
this, and I actually felt like, an upbeat, like if I could whistle, a whistling piece would have definitely been in the song because
Right,
then
right,
like,
right. Yeah.
right?
I've tried that in a recording and I can't whistle and I wish I could undo it.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah.
But
Yeah.
so I think that's what the kind of I'm trying to get at this very, I think, unique,
Yeah.
or maybe not unique. It's actually not that unique, but just this experience that people don't often talk about. Um,
Well,
yeah, yeah,
it's not unique to people who have the experience
yes,
of transporting to another cultural context. And frankly, most Americans haven't done it. Most of those who have done it as tourists, where you're very much in a bubble that
yeah,
is meant to basically prop up your American experience as a tourist, and is a very kind of curated intersection with another culture, kind
yeah,
of attuned to making you feel good about yourself. Because that's what the tour guides are selling, right? They want you to feel good and come back and do it again. So, but it is very common for what, in terms of what you've described, and I think that that experience of, a Black American with a load of watermelons, feeling free to do that because he knows nobody's going to be doing the racial trope on him,
yeah.
free to be himself
Mhm.
outside of his own country, right? And that interplay and the going both ways thing, and all that, I think is really
Well,
a powerful
I mean,
vignette.
this goes back to your interpretation of enough, right? It's like we can better be ourselves, right?
Yeah,
And I think that's it. It's like I could unlock a part of myself
yeah.
um, that to me actually feels quite American, but I couldn't really,
Yeah, right. One of my first well, my very first interview was with Joey Williams, who's a major leader in the California coalition of tribes, and we were reflecting a lot on what it means to be indigenous.
Mm-hmm.
And he obviously indigenous peoples, and I don't want to in any way minimize the indigeneity that he was referencing, right? That has its very powerful, unique thing. But my comment was that, I think part of the problem for white Americans is, and you brought this up earlier, in referencing, for example, Irish Americans. So we have separated ourselves or been separated from our indigeneity.
Yes.
And so I think for white Americans, we're substituting Americanness
Mm.
for some sort of indigeneity
Oh, I love
that
this.
we've lost.
Mm. Yes.
And therefore, we're not ourselves.
Yes. Yes.
And therefore, a conversation with someone like yourself who hasn't lost it.
Mm. Oh,
Joseph lost it. I don't mean who hasn't lost it, or is actively trying to press into what it means and the emotional, psychological dimensions of what it means to be an intersectional indigenous person, right? I think we could be more ourselves if we could press in and actually, like, wow, what's that like, and all that. But also, the other thing I raised with Joey, and again, I said I don't want to diminish the indigeneity that is, that we're legitimately talking about here. It's really, really crucial. But we're all human beings, actually. Our indigeneity is actually rooted in something much more common than we think. But I think we can only recover that if Americans could, like, okay, I'm going to get rid of my substitute in indigeneity. I'm going to try to figure out whatever roots of indigeneity I have, but realize that all of Joseph's, mine, Joey Williams, Tamara Lanier, all the people I've interviewed, we actually are all grounded in a common indigeneity that would allow us then to celebrate the multiplicity and diversity more. And anyway, now I'm talking like the guy that's getting interviewed, but
No,
I'll
no,
come back to you. Your album surfaces a lot of this stuff, though. Yeah,
Kevin, I wanted to have a conversation with you, so this is wonderful.
yeah,
I think
exactly.
the and I love, love, love the connection you've made. It's something I felt and didn't quite, wasn't quite able to articulate it that way in terms of the substituting of indigeneity, um, and the importance of that so many of us can learn from indigenous communities around how fundamental that is to being um, a human being, like a whole human being. And I think there's been, I remember going to something where it was like a training actually, or something like for white Americans, and the facilitator said something effective. You all got a raw deal,
Mm,
right? Like the what you lost
mm,
trade um, for essentially being erased, having these
yeah,
parts of you erased, so that you could have this um, you know again I think the white privilege thing is real, and I almost get
yeah,
concerned
yeah,
about using it sometimes because I think it needs to be talked about in a nuanced way. Like
sure.
there's differences with like working class whites, and there's lots of it's
Yeah,
complicated.
the whole
But
class element
yeah,
of that
class is
is
hugely
often not
important,
talked about. Yeah,
hugely important to talk about. In
yeah,
fact, I think the reason racism exists is to prop up class, right? Like that's
mm,
so
mm,
so I think we need to talk in a nuanced way. But I think I'll just say I really, really appreciate this connection you made.
mm,
It's learning I'm going to take away from this conversation. That's why I love to
mm,
have conversations. So thank you.
yeah. Well, I'm gonna make an executive decision here because I'm trying to keep my episodes in
Mhm.
a rather elastic time limit.
Yeah, yeah.
They go shorter and longer, and I think what I'm going to do is actually kind of bring us. And for my listeners' benefit, if you check out the album, you'll realize we've been talking primarily about tracks in what Joseph's called Act One of the album. And there's a piece that transitions from the end of Act One into Act Two called Intermission, appropriately, for lots of reasons. I think I'm going to have us converse a bit about intermission, and then I'm gonna pause us and set up a segue to our next interview where we'll finish talking about the album and then press into just some, okay, so what do we do with this? Like, what can people actually do that might make America, if not great, at least like better, that kind of, and certainly not great again, because I'm
Yeah.
still waiting for the answer to say, all right, if it's going to be great again, when was it great first? Tell me that. And nobody has an answer for that. So
We're
anyway,
we're we're a young, yeah,
yeah,
there's a lot to talk about there. But
yeah, we got to grow up before we can be great. So let's grow up. Anyway,
there's more to write.
so yeah, so I want to talk about intermission and listeners, I'm skipping over a bunch of really really important beautiful lyrics and pieces here as I do this, so I really do hope you'll check out the whole album, and I'll make sure you have links and ways to do that in the description. But there's some lines in intermission, which I think is a really crucial pivot in the whole album. It's just pregnant with all kinds of things here. America came to us first, crashed through our town and looted our pride, and sold us a story of westernized glory that we can work for, but we aren't meant to find. I just think that's such a description of the whole kind of, there's a sort of, I'm going to use colonial in quotes because America, quote unquote, never colonized, right? But there is a cultural, socio-political colonization, a mindset colonization that America has certainly promoted. Um, and the whole relationship with China is described here in a few short lines. And it's got individual layers to it. Just so pregnant. So anyway, those lines really jumped out at me. I'd love to hear your reflections on them.
Yeah, I just gotta say this again, Kevin. It's what an amazing thing, a gift to talk to a fellow poet and lyricist
Mm,
because you understand how much, we pour over words
yeah.
to come up with something like this.
I
Um,
mean, this didn't just, you weren't just sitting at a Starbucks and write this out on a napkin in the spur of the moment. Come on.
it's yeah, we put in
Yeah.
the work. We put in the work.
Sometimes they drop like that, but
Yeah,
mostly it's hard work. Yeah.
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 Um, I just a little bit of history that
Sure. Please.
on this. So like the Forbes family, right?
Yeah.
The like we have Forbes magazine, all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
So they made their first fortune by illegally pushing opium in China.
Mm,
Um, so they're basically a drug cartel, right?
yeah.
And like all the narratives right now about Mexican drug cartels, whatever. It's like,
Right.
but that's how
And of
they,
course, the British, the
yeah,
British were very
100%.
involved in all that stuff.
Oh yeah,
And
it's very
yeah.
Western kind of
Yep.
like an
Yeah.
allyship kind of thing. And uh, then they took that fortune, um, and they invested it in the Transcontinental Railroad, right?
Mm,
So
mm,
to me, it's this idea of that's an example of, and well, maybe
sure.
let me go back to sort of the location of China and how this affects me personally. If I think
Yeah.
about macro history and then like my own story, right? So through the Opium Wars led to what China calls the 100 Years of Shame, right? Because there were things like, the Summer Palace and sort of these places in China that were revered and just, part cultural establishments, institutions um, that were, bombed and ransacked and looted and that kind of thing. And just kind of China felt humiliated. And then so it's kind of idea of like the 100 Years of Shame
Mm,
that then sort of plants the seeds for the communist revolution,
right.
which, if I'm super honest with you, like I think actually had some things that I think were well intentioned, but ultimately, went off the rails a bit, right? And
Yeah.
and so my family was on the wrong side of that revolution, and that's why I'm here. Right?
Mm,
Like
mm,
so
mhm.
sometimes it's this idea of like, oh, your countries are all messed up, and then so that's you come over here and we're gonna save you. It's like, no, no, actually you all started it by meddling over there.
Yeah.
And like 100 years, again, it's a rounding error. It's not that long of a
Yeah.
time, right?
Right.
For
Right.
for the 150 years
You think
between,
about total history and yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
or just
Especially
even like,
China's history.
yeah,
Right.
exactly, right?
Like
Again.
it's a
So
blip.
exactly. And you can there's so many of these you think about like Vietnamese Americans, you can think about
Yeah.
there's so many folks that are here.
Yeah.
It's actually you trace it back to like you trace it back to it's actually American interference in a lot of
Mhm.
ways that
Yeah.
then led to these domino effects that led us here. It's not like
Yes.
yeah. So I think I'm trying
Yep.
to get at some of that, right? America came to us first, crashed through our town, and looted our pride. And I
Yeah.
think the looted our pride is very specific to Shanghai because we talked earlier about how I think Shanghainese people, a lot of them have a really internalized Western superiority, which
Mm,
I find really tragic, right? It's like,
yeah.
um, and just as an example, we are walking around Shanghai and my dad said, "Oh, look at that skyscraper. That's as good as anything in New York." And I was like,
Mm.
"Why is New York the standard for
Why
you?"
is that the point
Right.
of reference?
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Why is that the point of reference? Right, right.
Yeah.
Um, have there's like amazing temples that have been sitting in, Beijing or these other places
Yeah.
or in China for thousands of years. Like, why isn't that the reference,
Yep.
Um, and so there's
That's
a
really powerful. Yeah.
yeah, so there's a
Yeah.
part of me it's like trying to get at this sense of like it took more than just the stuff. It took a people's pride, right?
Mm,
Um,
mm,
and then and then my personal story, right? My parents like, well, there's no opportunity for you in China. We're in come to America. Um, and it's this idea of so much of historical reasoning for immigration is not actually about saving people from their messed up countries. It's about
right.
filling labor needs,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. It's
Right.
very
And so-
self-serving. It's very
yeah.
self-serving. Yeah.
And so there's a way. I'm a part of a wave of letting folks in that. I mean, it's nuanced, and so there's a lot to talk about. But it was to fill a certain, kind of quota for a type of labor that was never going to be,
Right.
you were never going to be equal in this
Right.
way, to this day,
Yeah.
uh, people often have this, especially, nowadays it's complicated because people have this idea that, particularly Chinese Americans and East Asian Americans are all wealthy or something.
Right.
And if you really aggregate the data, there's a huge amount of income inequality within because of the different like generations of East Asian immigration.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and then you look at things like there is, there's this term called the bamboo ceiling,
Mm,
right?
mm,
Kind of like the
okay.
glass ceiling, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
it's really, really apparent, and I certainly apparent in my personal life, in my kind of last career as a nonprofit, person, and so it's this idea of, yeah, you can, or that common thing with whether immigrants or folks of color, it's this idea of your parents telling you, well, y- we're here, you're not white, so you got to be prepared to be 10 times better, right?
Right. Yeah. What a
And
message.
and it's this thing of uh so yeah, you can work for it, and you
But
can
it's
you
not
can,
actually meant for you. You're not
yeah,
meant to find it,
exactly, it's
is
meant
the
to be
line.
really hard for
Mhm.
you so we get our needs met, but we continue this sort of classist system,
Yeah.
um, but you help us kind of perpetuate it, right?
Right.
And when you're not useful, we will kick you out. I mean, it's like Chinese exclusion, right? You need the Chinese labor after emancipation, and so you have the Chinese coolies and all this stuff. And then at some point, it's like, we're good. And then, or because of just xenophobia or whatever,
Right.
kick the Chinese out, and then you start immigrating Mexicans, and right, like because
Right.
at the
And
end of the day,
now let's get rid of them. So, but who's
yeah,
going to fit? And we're going to get rid of the
yeah,
Haitians and we're going to, so
yeah.
what's
And then also, I think what we often don't talk about enough is the collateral damage for working class whites,
right.
right? Like because it's the elite whites that also are then saying, uh, well, it kind of like they just want their labor needs filled. They
Right.
don't actually, in a funny way, they literally are colorblind, right? It's like
Right.
I don't like they don't,
Yeah, yeah.
and
Not
it's
in a good way, but
yeah,
in
not in a
yeah,
good
yeah.
way.
But in a utilitarian way. Yep.
Yeah, and so it's just, I think, really understanding the intersection of classism. We talk about racism. I really think we can't talk about it outside of classism
Yeah.
and this kind of predatory version of
Yeah.
capitalism,
Yeah.
because that's ultimately what it does, and that's what dehumanizes
Yeah.
all of us, I think. Like when I think about, let's say, the winners of the system, like an Elon Musk, and I
Hmm.
think about, I see him as like a very vacuous human being.
Hmm.
Like I couldn't imagine, like it's actually terrifying for me if that is the criteria of greatness.
Right.
Like the two most powerful, like the most powerful person in the world right now is what, Donald Trump, and the wealthiest person is Elon Musk. If that
Yeah.
is the criteria of greatness, I feel like um
Right.
wow, these are two
Yeah.
very, I don't think these are happy people. I don't think these are joyful people. I don't think these are people that are humanly whole in any way. I
Yeah.
think these are like very damaged people. Uh,
Yeah. Broken,
yeah, that
wounded.
that are living really vacuous lives. Like
Yeah.
who, um, like I would not want my children to have their life,
Right.
and
Right.
'cause I don't
Right.
think it's a good life.
Yeah.
So, I really think it hurts everyone.
Right. But they're kind of, going back to your uh, um, skyscraper
Yeah,
analogy earlier.
yeah,
If these are the two biggest skyscrapers,
yeah,
right? Is that really what we want to emulate and say, hey, ours are as good as that, right?
yeah.
Yeah. So, well, hey, I'm going to start segueing us from this. We've been discussing intermission. That's basically, partway through. It's all the way through Act One. We're going to come back in at Act Two. Shanghai, an American Story. I hope my listeners will check it out. All the information for where to find it, again, will be in the podcast description. And just so everybody knows, the outro music, again, I'll just remind you, is going to be Foreign on the Fourth. And really hope you enjoy that. Give it a full listen. Listen closely now. Maybe the lyrics will affect you in a different way as you listen to that. And Joseph, thanks for today.
Thank
And
you, Kevin.
yeah,
So it's
look
a
forward to our next conversation as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. All right. All right. Well, bye, everybody. We'll see you next time. Thank you, Joseph.
Thank you, Ken.
Waking up the sun for a stroll on Wooey Road, a luck and coffee and a bang in my hand. Blue and yellow bike spinning, sweat out of all types. It makes me wonder where I'm going and if I'm gonna get there. Hey neighbor, that's a lot of watermelons. If your hometown saw you now, he laughed and he said, brother, we're in China where they say it's got a cooling effect. I'm just saying it's hot as a mother. I had never been more American when I was foreign on the 4th of July in Shanghai, blending borderlines into a place that only lives in my mind. No, I had never been more American, like I was born on the 4th of July in Shanghai. I was American. I grew up living on the West Coast, where you're the part of me that I miss most. Another side of myself just seems to jump off the shelf when I'm around with you. Is it the language of my childhood that's running through the streets to tell me I'm never alone? Is it the hunger of my eyes to see that people just like me can be anything, even ordinary? I had never been more American when I was foreign on the 4th of July in Shanghai, blending borderlines into a place that only lives in my mind. No, I had never been more American, like I was born on the 4th of July in Shanghai, independent of the white gaze on my life in Shanghai. I was American. Banner, it hit me like a hammer. All the colors within are red, white, and blue. In the dawning early light, I found freedom from the fighting over stories that erase me and you. I had never been more American when I was foreign on the 4th of July in Shanghai, blending borderlines into a place that only lives in my mind. No, I had never been more American, like I was born on the 4th of July in Shanghai, independent of the white gaze on my life in Shanghai. I was American.